I don't know who you are, but I can't leave you here to die." The waves crashed violently against the rocks as Ethan pulled the half-conscious man onto his small fishing boat. The man's clothes were torn, his face covered in dried salt, and his breathing was weak. He had no ID, no belongings, nothing but a look of desperation in his eyes. "Who are you? What happened to you?" Ethan asked, wrapping a blanket around him, but the man just coughed, his voice barely a whisper. "Water. Please." Ethan rushed to grab a bottle, helping the man drink. He had seen stranded fishermen before, but something about this was different. The man's hands were rough, like he had been gripping onto something for dear life. His skin was sunburnt, as if he had been exposed for days. "How long have you been out here?" Ethan asked again, but the man just looked at him, eyes filled with something strange. Fear? Gratitude? Or was it something else? As Ethan steered his boat back to shore, he couldn't shake off the feeling that this man wasn't just an ordinary castaway. But what he didn't know was that by saving him, he had just changed his own fate forever. Ethan's small fishing boat rocked as it cut through the choppy waters toward shore. The sun had begun to set, painting the sky with streaks of red and orange. He glanced at the man lying on the deck, wrapped in a damp blanket, still shivering. His breathing had steadied, but he was still too weak to move. "Hang in there. We're almost there," Ethan muttered, gripping the wheel tighter. But something felt off. The man wasn't just weak, he was afraid. His eyes darted around, scanning the horizon like he expected something, or someone, to show up. Ethan reached for his radio. Maybe the Coast Guard could help? But just as he was about to call in, the man's hand shot up, gripping Ethan's wrist with surprising strength. "No, no authorities! Please!" The man's voice was hoarse but desperate. Ethan hesitated. He had no idea who this guy was or what had happened to him. But one thing was clear. He was running from something. "Look, I don't know what kind of trouble you're in, but you need help," Ethan said. The man swallowed hard, staring at the waves. After a moment, he whispered, "They're looking for me. If they find me, I'm dead." Ethan's heart pounded. Who? Who was looking for him? Pirates? The authorities? Something worse? He pulled the boat into the dock, his mind racing. He had planned to take the man straight to the hospital, but now he wasn't so sure. If someone was hunting him, calling for help might make things worse. "All right," Ethan sighed. "You can stay at my place for now, but you need to tell me everything." The man nodded weakly, but the fear in his eyes didn't fade. As Ethan helped him onto the dock, he had no idea that within hours his quiet life was about to be shattered, and the Navy was about to show up at his door. Ethan's cabin was small but sturdy, nestled on the outskirts of town near the cliffs. The moment he stepped inside, he locked the door and pulled the curtains shut. He wasn't sure why, but something about this man's fear was starting to get to him. The stranger collapsed onto the couch, still shivering. Ethan grabbed a towel and handed it to him. "Here, dry off, and start talking." The man hesitated, then took a deep breath. "My name is Cole. I was part of an ocean research expedition. 5 of us were sent to explore an uncharted trench deep in the Pacific." Ethan narrowed his eyes. "A research team? So what happened? Why were you alone out there?" Cole clenched his jaw, his hands tightening into fists. "Because they didn't want me to leave." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. "Who?" Cole's breathing grew unsteady. "The people funding our expedition. They weren't just scientists, they were something else. They found something down there, Ethan, something that was never meant to be disturbed." Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken. He was just a fisherman. He didn't sign up for this. What did they find? Cole hesitated, as if deciding whether or not to say it. And then, in a barely audible voice, he whispered, "A ship. A massive, ancient ship, not from this world." Ethan stared at him. "You're joking." Cole shook his head, his eyes dark and serious. "I wish I was." Ethan let out a slow breath. This was insane. A lost ship? An ancient secret? And now Cole was on the run from people willing to kill over it? Before Ethan could ask another question, a loud thud came from outside. Both men froze. Ethan moved toward the window, slowly peeking through the curtain. His blood ran cold. A black SUV had just pulled up outside his cabin. The headlights flickered off, and the doors began to open. Someone had found them. And they weren't here for a friendly visit. Ethan's mind raced. His cabin was isolated. No one ever came up here unless they had a reason. And judging by the way the SUV's doors opened in perfect sync, whoever had arrived wasn't just passing through. Cole gripped Ethan's arm, his voice a sharp whisper. "They found me." Ethan's stomach tightened. Who were these people, and what did they want with him now? The figures stepped out of the vehicle, moving like shadows. There were 3 of them, all dressed in black, their faces concealed by tactical gear. One of them had something clipped to his ear. He was talking into it. Ethan's breath hitched. "Military?" he muttered under his breath. Cole shook his head. "Worse, private operatives." Ethan exhaled sharply. He had no idea how deep this went, but one thing was clear. If they were here, they weren't leaving without Cole. Think, Ethan. Think. There was no back door. If they ran, they'd be spotted immediately. The only real exit was the front, and that was exactly where the men were. Then, a knock. A slow, deliberate knock on the wooden door. Ethan and Cole didn't move. A voice followed, smooth and authoritative. "Mr. Walker?" Ethan's blood ran cold. They knew his name. "We know you're in there. Step outside. Let's talk." Talk? That wasn't happening. Ethan clenched his fists. If they stormed in, they'd be trapped. He needed an advantage, something to throw them off. His eyes darted to the corner of the room. His old double-barrel shotgun rested against the wall. He hadn't fired it in years. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to change that. He looked at Cole. "You trust me?" Cole's eyes flickered with fear, but he nodded. Ethan took a slow breath, grabbing the shotgun and pressing his back against the wall. Then, he reached for the doorknob. With one swift motion, he yanked the door open, and everything exploded into chaos. The moment Ethan yanked the door open, a blinding flashlight hit his eyes. "Drop the weapon!" a voice barked. Ethan didn't flinch. His shotgun wasn't even aimed. He just held it low, like a warning. The 3 men stood in a perfect triangle formation, their movements calculated, trained. These weren't just some thugs. They were professionals. Cole stayed hidden behind the door, barely breathing. "I don't know who you are," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. "But you're trespassing on my property. You've got 5 seconds to explain before I decide you're a threat." The lead man stepped forward, just enough for the porch light to illuminate his face. Strong jaw, steely eyes, a scar across his cheek. "Mr. Walker," he said smoothly, "we're not here to hurt you, but the man you're protecting is very important to us." Ethan's grip on the shotgun tightened. "Yeah? That's funny, because he didn't mention any friends." The man let out a short, humorless chuckle. "That's because we're not his friends." Silence. Thick, tense. Cole's breathing had turned shallow. Ethan could hear it. "He's dangerous," the man continued, "and if you don't give him to us now, you'll be in danger too." Ethan's mind raced. Every instinct screamed that these guys weren't telling the whole truth. If Cole was some kind of criminal, why hadn't they arrived with sirens? With badges? Why the secrecy? Something wasn't right. "And if I say no?" Ethan asked. The man exhaled, shaking his head like he was disappointed. "Then I'm afraid things get complicated." That was it. The confirmation Ethan needed. He moved before they could react. In one swift motion, Ethan swung the door shut and locked it. "Run!" he shouted at Cole. The window behind them shattered. A flashbang was thrown in. A deafening explosion of light and sound filled the room. Ethan hit the ground, his ears ringing, vision flashing white, and in that moment of chaos, they came in. Ethan's head was spinning. His ears rang from the blast, his vision blurred. Boots stomped across the wooden floor. Through the haze, he saw two men moving fast. One grabbed Cole by the collar, yanking him up. The other turned to Ethan. "Stay down," the man warned, his voice muffled through the ringing in Ethan's ears. Ethan ignored him. He lunged. He grabbed the man's arm and twisted hard. A gun clattered to the floor. Cole, barely able to see through the blinding light, fought back. He elbowed the man holding him and stumbled backward, gasping for air. Ethan reached for the gun, but a boot kicked him in the ribs. Pain shot through his side. He rolled, barely dodging a second kick. "That's enough," the leader said. Calm. Too calm. The moment Ethan looked up, he saw the gun pointed at his head. Cole froze. Everything went still. "Mr. Walker, I don't want to kill you," the leader said, tilting his head slightly. "But I will if I have to." Ethan clenched his jaw, breathing hard. His mind raced. Cole was trapped between the two other men. The odds were bad. But then, a sound. A low, distant rumble, barely noticeable at first. Then, it grew. The walls trembled. The air vibrated. And then, from outside, a single, powerful boom. The leader's face shifted. He heard it too. One of the men turned toward the window. "What the—" And then, out of nowhere, a massive floodlight burst through the glass. The entire house lit up like daylight. The men panicked, raising their guns. Ethan saw his chance. With one swift move, he kicked the leader's hand, sending the gun flying. At the same moment, the front door exploded off its hinges. A voice boomed through a speaker. "Drop your weapons! Hands in the air!" Outside, a military-grade helicopter hovered just above the ground. Armed soldiers poured in. Cole's captors turned, but it was too late. They were surrounded. Ethan gasped for breath, still on the floor. His vision finally cleared. Through the dust and chaos, a man in a crisp uniform stepped inside. And then, Cole did something Ethan never expected. He stood up straight, looked the officer dead in the eye, and said, "Took you long enough?" The room was in chaos. Dust swirled in the air, boots stomped on broken wood, and the cold barrel of a gun hit the ground with a metallic clatter. Ethan could barely process what just happened. 1 second, he and Cole were outnumbered, staring down the barrel of death. The next, the entire house was swarmed by military personnel. And then there was Cole, standing tall, calm, as if he had expected this all along. The officer at the front, a man in a decorated Navy uniform, strode forward. His expression was unreadable, but his presence alone commanded absolute authority. "Mr. Reynolds," the officer said, his deep voice cutting through the noise. "We've been looking for you." Ethan's stomach dropped. Reynolds? That wasn't Cole's last name. Cole didn't react. He simply exhaled, shook his head slightly, and muttered, "Figured as much." Ethan pushed himself off the ground, ignoring the ache in his ribs. He glanced between Cole and the officer. Something wasn't right. "What the hell is going on?" Ethan asked, his voice low but firm. The officer finally turned to him. "And you must be Ethan Walker." Ethan tensed. "We'll get to you in a moment," the officer said. "But first, He turned back to Cole, his expression shifting. "I need you to come with us. Now." For the first time since the chaos started, Cole's face showed something different. Not fear, not confusion. Regret. Ethan frowned. Nothing made sense. "Cole," he muttered, stepping closer. "What is this? Who are you?" Cole didn't meet his eyes. Instead, he sighed, wiped a hand over his face, and finally said, "I should have told you sooner." Ethan's chest tightened. "Told me what?" Cole hesitated. Then he turned himself in. No fight, no hesitation. He simply put his hands behind his head as the soldiers stepped in, securing his arms. Ethan was stunned. "Cole," he called. But Cole didn't respond. The officer signaled to his team, and just like that, they started escorting Cole out of the house. Ethan's mind raced. None of this made sense. And then, just before stepping out the door, Cole finally turned back. He met Ethan's gaze, and with a half smirk, he said something that sent chills down Ethan's spine. "Trust me, Walker. This isn't over yet." And with that, he was gone. Ethan stood frozen, his heart pounding as the military convoy disappeared down the road. Cole was gone. Taken away. For a long moment he just stood there, staring at the dust settling in the moonlight. The man he had saved, the man he had trusted, was hiding something far bigger than he could ever imagine. But the part that rattled him the most? Cole's last words. "This isn't over yet." Ethan clenched his fists. What did that mean? Just then, a black SUV rolled up in front of him. The same officer from before stepped out, this time without his soldiers. "Get in." Ethan hesitated. "Why?" The officer exhaled, glancing towards the road where Cole had been taken. Then he looked Ethan dead in the eye and said something that shook him to his core. "Because you saved the wrong man, Walker. And now, they'll be coming for you too." 1 year later. The world had changed for Ethan. His quiet, simple life was gone. He sat on the deck of a secluded house, staring at the ocean. The same ocean where it all began, where he had pulled a half-drowned stranger out of the water, never knowing it would change his life forever. He had spent the last year uncovering the truth. Cole Reynolds wasn't just any lost explorer. He was a man who had faked his own death. A man carrying secrets so dangerous, so powerful, that the world's most powerful forces wanted him erased. And Ethan had been caught in the middle of it all. For months he had been watched, followed, questioned by men in dark suits who never gave him their names. But through it all, he had never regretted saving Cole. Because despite the secrets, despite the lies, Cole had saved him too. Not from danger, not from some enemy, but from an ordinary life with no purpose. Now Ethan wasn't just some fisherman. He was a man with answers, a man with purpose, and most importantly, a man ready for what was coming next. Because if there was one thing he had learned, Cole Reynolds wasn't done yet. And neither was he. What would you have done if you were Ethan? Let me know in the comments. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another mind-blowing story like this. Tell me, which country are you watching from? Let's see how far this story has traveled.